Welcome to Are You Paying Attention? The podcast exploring attention measurement, brand suitability, and media effectiveness. I'm your host, Sara Maskivish, SVP of Market Enablement and Verification at Protected by Mediaocean. The verification market has relied on the same legacy models for over 2 decades. We're here to challenge that status quo, bust industry myths, and shine a light on the hidden gaps everyone assumes are covered. In our inaugural episode, we're tackling a major advertising paradox. In the name of brand safety, have we gone too far? To find out, I sit down with April Weeks, Chief Media Investment Officer at Basis Technologies. We dissect how over-restricted keyword block lists are punishing premium publishers and how modern suitability must adapt to dynamic, nuanced media world. April, welcome. This is our first episode of, hopefully many. Today we're going to be talking about brand safety, which I know is a topic that is near and dear to both of our hearts. So I'm excited to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Happy to be here.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your role?
Sure. I'm the Chief Investment and Media Officer at Basis. I lead our managed services team. And so brand safety is something that is very top of mind for us and part of our everyday.
Well, thank you again. We're excited to have you here. So I think for years, advertisers, something that I hear a lot is balancing the act of risk versus reach, right? And they've been told for years that, in order to have the ultimate brand protection, you kind of have to sacrifice campaign delivery or, reaching audiences. Do you think, over the years that is the right approach? Do you think, we've gotten that right? Or what are some examples of things that have gone wrong with that approach?
I think in the early days, we treated brand safety, I would say, a bit too blunt. It was, broad genre blocking. Where we got it right was being mindful that brand safety is important and context matters, an alignment of a marketer's message and the advertising environment is very important. That we got right. I think where we got it wrong and where it's encouraging to see that we're making progress is the difference between safety and suitability. And I think safety for so long was very binary. It's safe or it's not safe. And I think that led us down a path where we overblocked and we inadvertently hurt our reach. We excluded valuable content. And it wasn't always necessary.
Definitely. I agree. Do you think that advertisers are kind of still choosing to kind of overprotect in the name of maybe, CYA?
I think in some cases, yes. It requires orchestration. It really does. And it requires thinking about a strategy and how you're going to govern that and how you're going to align it to your specific brands and even inside your specific brands, specific campaigns, depending on the message and audience that you're reaching. So it is another layer and a component to the planning process. I think there's a lot of marketers that are starting to turn the page on that and realizing that in order to drive the best performance and not miss places that actually can be very valuable and very relevant, kind of the legacy ways of doing it, we need to leave them behind. I think people, like everything, are in various stages of adoption and turning that around, but I do think we're making progress.
Knowing that we're in this, kind of influx of adopting, different kind of policies and suitability standards, do you think that we're at a point of reaching where each brand has their own kind of suitability standard versus this, kind of industry universal standard exists?
I don't think we're quite there yet, but I think that is the path that we're on. My belief is the marketers that are going to be the most successful in pivoting from the legacy ways of brand safety to truly adopting brand suitability, it is going to be nuanced. It's going to be very specific to each brand. It's going to be, my belief is it should just be part of your planning and strategy philosophy. When you're upfront planning and talking about your audiences, your context, the environments that you want to be in, this should be part of that planning criteria as opposed to post-campaign verification, which certainly there is still a role for that. But I think the ones that are going to be the most successful and embrace this are the ones that are going ahead and making it part of the planning strategy. And not everybody's on the same timeline, and that's okay. Because I think, there is nuance and difference between brands and what works for them may not work for others, but that is definitely the path that we're on.
Yeah. I think, advertisers, when I'm chatting with them, don't even know that that's an option. right? That they can kind
Sure.
of incorporate
Sure.
that as part of the strategy.
Right.
I'm finding some are still very kind of set in their ways or feeling very limited based on the tech or what they've done in the past.
Right.
So yeah, excited for the industry to, try to kind of help the advertisers get there.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the publishers play a role there too.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're trying to monetize their inventory in a smart and meaningful way. And I think the more that they can surface signals and give insight and transparency, I think it helps that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that because it's a great segue. When you think about CTV, especially, that's obviously one of the harder channels to measure.
Yes.
I was curious if you thought, the publishers, kind of what's your philosophy? Do they have a responsibility in sharing more signals?
I believe that they do. Yes. I mean, I think it's like anything else. I mean, obviously, I know that there can be some inherent challenges with that, but if you want to continue growing the channel and doing so in a meaningful way, you've got to be able to prove that it works. I mean, every C-suite marketer is under pressure today to show the ROI and show what's working. And I think there is an opportunity, especially in the CTV space, for the publishers to provide, more signal around engagement, genre, what's being watched. And then ultimately, if that can be provided, I believe it naturally helps grow the spend.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's also proving what they did right?
You're right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not
There's
always a
learning there.
negative.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's learning there.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So in terms of, the internet and the digital ecosystem has really been more nuanced, right? And evolved as we've been talking about with CTV. Now there's social, with verification staying so blunt, right? The controls are staying so blunt, and binary. Do you think and we've made it this far without saying the word AI, do you think with AI and, large language models, are we at a point of truly understanding context and sentiment, emotion at scale?
I think we're getting there. Yes, I do. I think the smart AI tools are able to understand the sentiment, intention, the tone, the things that are important that go beyond just the blunt delivery around brain safety. And it's really around what is the intention? Why is the consumer there? And does it make sense for the message, for the brand? Is there resonance there? Yes. So I think now's a really interesting time to test and learn. And I think the best marketers may not have it 100% figured out, but they're starting to experiment and test and learn and make things they go.
Right. Right. What are some examples of content that have kind of historically been blocked or, avoided out of kind of default that isn't really always necessarily unsafe?
There's a few. I mean, I think one of the largest that comes to mind for me is just news. I mean, it's so obvious, but it's also, I think, really surprising how many times news just as a broad genre is just completely blocked. And, there are valuable cases where when a brand has done something right and they've launched something new, there's a new product that news actually can be a suitable alignment contextually. Obviously, you've got to put governance in place. There are times when it's not appropriate.
Right.
But I think just this blunt approach of just block all news, I think it's probably in many ways been a disservice. And I think that's being rethought. Certainly, I know there are sensitive categories around DNI. There's things that are happening, on the macro world stage from a cultural standpoint. And again, that's where I think it comes down to what's appropriate for your brand. What does your brand stand for? What's important for them. And you've got to make those choices very specific to that brand. But broad, just we can't be in any of these genres. I don't think it's a post that serves us as well now because I think the technology is catching up and we should leverage it.
I agree. Yeah. I'm often talking about those cultural moments, especially in social and short form video. I think a lot of brands really miss the opportunity, right, to be part of some of these cultural moments.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then inherently it can limit reach.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I think we're definitely reading it. Amazing. Okay. So social is, another challenging
yes
environment and channel in terms of, measurement. But of course, just like CTV, more and more advertisers are shifting their dollars there. When it comes to user generated content, same thing there. How do you think brands can, kind of handle that situation?
Again, I think it's another case where it's nuanced. And I think you have to understand, first and foremost, why are you on a specific social platform? Because they all while it's in the social space, they do have differences in audience. They do have differences in terms of the type of user generated content. So, one, it's what's your strategy for being there? Two, who are the creators and what is the content? And does it align and have a purpose for your brand and your message? Certainly you can rely still a bit on the platforms themselves, but then that's where I think you also need your own parameters of what is and is not acceptable. What is the tone? What is the context? What is the intention of a user being there? But just like CTV, I mean, it's meaningful. Audiences are there. If you want to scale your message, I think there's effective reach there. It's just you've got to be more purposeful. And that's why I think it belongs up front in the planning process, not the after fact and post verification, because then it's too late.
Right.
And if it's upfront, I think it actually feeds better information on the back end for future planning and measurement.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, to your point, none of this means that, post-bid measurement should go away. It plays a
No,
role in
absolutely
informing,
not.
those
100%. I
strategies.
mean, and when you think about just even programmatic specifically, prefix segments, I mean, what you all are doing with protected. I mean, there's a lot of really good tools out there. And I think it's the balance of pre-campaign, post-campaign coming together. And then in the middle, what's right for your brand in terms of your parameters, your governance, and what's acceptable.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, back to the lovely AI
Yes.
buzzword and conversation.
Yes.
Probably the next challenge that I'm anticipating, and I'm sure you see it as well, is advertising being now embedded into AI
Yes.
assistants and chats, right? And now we also, of course, have more AI bot traffic than human traffic.
Yes.
Personally, I think philosophically, I don't think we're as an industry ready to necessarily say what the right strategy is. But I would love to hear in terms of, what should advertisers kind of be leaning into or also avoiding?
It's interesting. I do think I agree with you. We're not there yet. We're learning and it's the early days. I think it's a test and learn strategy. I would not shy away from advertising in those environments, but just because we can advertise doesn't always mean we should. And so I think it's really interesting because you have to understand what's the intention of the prompt in the conversation that's happening. And, what I think we need to be cautious of as an industry is not turning away consumers before we actually have a chance to see what AI can really do and what the advertising opportunities are in that specific space. And I think if we are too aggressive or over rotate, if you will, in terms of those advertising opportunities where they feel invasive to consumers or it's just not comfortable for them, that's where I think we turn them off and we miss an opportunity. So it's testing and it's learning, but it's doing so, I think, with the mindset of this is still a consumer generated an engagement and just being mindful of that and of why they are there, what conversation and thoughts they're having. And sometimes you don't need to be there and sometimes you do.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll get there in terms of learning. You said
Yes.
test and learn.
Test and learn.
Right. Yep. I'm a
Right.
big fan of that. I love
Yes.
it. You're saying many, many things that I just could not agree more. And that wasn't even part of the prep. It's definitely on the same page. I
Yeah.
love it. So next topic and another great segue to, kind of wrap up in terms of this, AI and innovation, what meaning recommendations do you have for advertisers in terms of how to innovate responsibly?
I think it comes back to first and foremost, just having really transparent conversations with your clients and with the brands. What is the expectation for advertising in those environments? Kind of goes back to testing and learning, because I think there's as much learning with failure as there is with success, and being okay with it, maybe not generating the traditional KPIs and metrics from a measurement standpoint because it's early and it's developing. But I think it's having those conversations, understanding what you're trying to learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are you hoping to learn from this and what role could AI and advertising those environments, what role does it play in your overall media mix strategy?
Yeah.
And if it's just being there for the sake of being there, that's not really a good answer. It's the intention of what are your audiences? Why do you believe your audiences are there? How are they leveraging that environment? And where do you naturally fit in where you provide as an advertiser or brand value and you enhance the experience versus take away from it? And I think if you operate with that mindset, again, it kind of just comes back to testing and learning. and having realistic expectations about what it is. I mean, we've all been through the emergence of new channels, and we know the maturation is going to be very quick with this. So, we're advising our clients, test, learn, be in the space appropriately and for a purpose and a reason.
Yeah. So amazing. One other kind of subject I wanted to touch on, you brought it up earlier, and especially working with agencies, the brand values, the personalized suitability, can be down to the advertiser level, but even to the campaign level.
Yes.
Having that flexibility.
Yes.
Some campaigns, I often say maybe prospecting could be more provocative.
Sure.
Where, lower funnel can be a little bit more, conservative.
Mhm.
Having, the flexibility and mindset. And again, campaign strategy, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, again, it just gets back to making it a sound part of your planning process. And to your point, knowing what the intention of the campaign is, not just at a brand level, but really taking it down a level and identifying what's important in that moment for that campaign and what's going to be the most effective.
Yeah.
Because the days of just blunt object, we don't have to do that anymore. So why should we?
Right.
I think it actually works campaigns.
Yeah. And I think the last thing to, kind of remember too is these legacy KPIs. That's campaign reach, used to be, bonus or, measured on campaign reach being a KPI of the campaign. I think that also, can kind of tie back to hurting brands.
I would
Suitability,
agree.
strategy.
100%. I mean, is reach still a KPI that's important? Sure. But so is engagement. So are other things,
Yeah.
there's a lot of
Contextual.
other things. Contextual alignment. Contextual is very important. So I think it's taking a step back and looking at a macro level and then putting all the pieces together to activate really smart campaigns.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. And yep. So, brand, I'm not going to say brand safety. It feels wrong to even say that. Now we say, brand alignment or brand suitability, but it's really important to take away. It's part of the strategy and not an after the fact,
Absolutely not.
strategy.
I mean, if it's after the fact, I think you're missing a really big opportunity, and it's changing fast. And so, words of advice are move away, to your point, from brand safety. It's really brand suitability. I don't think it has to be binary, safe, not safe. It's what's appropriate for your specific brand and campaign.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time and
Thanks
your
for having
perspective.
me.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
You're listening to the Mediaocean Podcast Network. For more of our shows, visit www.mediaocean.com/podcasts.